Mike's predictions might be a bit stark, but they're not predictions. They are happening right now. It's a pleasure to have you in the Great Lakes again, Mike. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. How about you? It's always great to be back.
Yeah, I'm having a great time. It's certainly an interesting location, lots of manufacturing, and
Yep.
hopefully not the soft underbelly, but hopefully there is something we can sort of learn. I'm going to click the record button.
Recording in progress.
What are we going to be talking about today?
So today we're going to be talking about P2T2R, which is People, Processes, Training, Technology, and Research. And we're basically going to do that by focusing in on the ISOC and cyber risk intelligence, what it means, what is the situation, how do we capture this stuff, but more importantly, how do we convert that into something that is actionable? So a lot of times we speak a lot about what threats and risks are out there, but we don't spend a lot of time on, well, now what can we do that we have the awareness? And that's what I want to concentrate on today a little bit more.
I like it. All right. Well, you have the floor. I'll be here in the background.
Okay, thank you very much. So then with that, let me just go to presentation mode. Just let me know if you can see it. I hope so.
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, so I got to do share screen. I'll be with you just
Yes.
in 2 seconds. I got a bit ahead of myself. Okay, so I'll start off with what are the top attack vectors that we're seeing right now and that are still applicable for us in this discussion. So we've got 6 of them. From these 6, the ones that I'm going to concentrate on today are 3, and they're interrelated. So we're dealing with open source intelligence via social media, open source intelligence about breached services like cloud servers, that kind of stuff. We're going to talk about social engineering and the supply chain, how these attacks are relevant for those areas. And most importantly, we're going to have a short discussion about disinformation, fake science, deep fakes. What is it? How does it depend on social media? How is it part of the hybrid warfare cycle? And why is it even interesting for us to know? So with that, let's start off with cloud risks. And I work with a lot of fantastic researchers, and one of those researchers is Paul. Paul has a site called Hackmageddon. I don't know if you know that. If you don't, go to the website. It's free information about the attacks that happen every month. And Paul does an absolutely fantastic job of putting these things into graphics on his website, which is at hackmageddon.com. And I use a lot of this stuff to bring points home without being too geekish and technical. And hopefully I'm achieving that today. So we have 2 different graphics. Graphics 1 on the left is the top exploited cloud services. So we have AWS, Google Firebase and Docs, Dropbox, Azure, Pastebin, GitHub, Google App Engine, something unknown, Google Drive, Microsoft Office 365 Suite, GitLab, Slack, Google Forms, Google Sites, AppScripts, Bitbucket, Microsoft OneDrive, and Microsoft SharePoint. So guess what? These are a lot of the services that we depend on if we develop, if we're doing work on code, if we're trying to implement certain things in operation, implement things in security, but also if you're in marketing and sales and that kind of stuff in order to stay connected to the environment, you'll be using things like Dropbox as well as things like WeTransfer to basically pass on big uploads of data to your customers. But unfortunately, all these services, all the ones that we depend on in times when we're disconnected or decentralized, these are the very things that are used by our adversaries to infect us. And that's what we see in the right picture. In the right picture, we see top exploited cloud services for delivery of malware and phishing attacks. These are the same actors. So AWS, Google Docs, Pastebin, Dropbox, Microsoft SharePoint, Google Apps and Scripts, Microsoft Forms, WeTransfer, Google Sites, Blogspot, LinkedIn, GitLab, and Minnote. Sorry, that's one that I didn't know about. It was interesting. But these are the services that are currently being used to infect us. Not cool, right? So if we take a look at those apps, those applications, and we take a look at or transpose that on how we're communicating with each other, we're using our smartphones. So we're using our, basically our tablets. We're using our phones to communicate with folks. And these are the things that people are using to break into security systems nowadays, and to also install modified versions of applications that look like they're legitimate, but they have backdoors and malicious code programmed into them. And this is so bad that it's actually happening based on the companies that create these phones, like Huawei, Xiaomi, and OnePlus. These are three Chinese-based companies, and there's other countries out there too. It's not just the Chinese, but these are some of the things that are really, really important for us to understand why it makes sense to implement security on mobile platforms, embedded devices, IoT devices. Because we talk about critical infrastructure, we spend a whole bunch of time about physical risks, but a lot of folks have this notion of capitulation or victimization. We're already breached, people are spying on us, so why the heck should we invest any time, money, or effort into stopping these attacks? Well, the short answer is the more you leave these attacks alone, the more systems get infected. The more systems that get infected, the more likely it is for us to get blackout scenarios that completely take everything offline. And then it sets the entire civilization of the world back into the dark ages, literally the dark ages. So it's not a question of why should we, but how fast can we, right? So if we take a look at these apps and these companies that manufacture those things, and we transpose this to social media, we have Facebook Pixel, we have Twitter, we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have all these different types of applications that also have mobile apps. And by the way, when you install these things, they also install trackers, and these apps trace your movement, your entire history. Again, we can't say, well, there's no use in doing this, because that's not true. We actually have solutions out there that block these things. And it's interesting to see how many websites no longer work correctly, because most of these websites are doing illegal things like cookie walls, etc. They're highly illegal. They're against the law in the European Union and in other countries, and they're downright dangerous. And the reason for that is this use case. So we have the trackers and the traced apps. They start collecting information on us, private information, stuff about our families, stuff about where we go, where do we pick up Starbucks, how do we drive to work every day, how do we drive to customers, what customers did we drive to, what kind of trainings do we do, everything and anything that we don't want people to know about us, not because we don't want to hide it, but because the more information people have about us, the more predictable we become, and they can use this information to not target us, but to target our family. And we're seeing this done in real time by Facebook and other social media outlets to target our kids. It's not a cool thing. It's really not good at all. So anyway, besides the fact that it's morally questionable and unethical. So it goes even further than this. It's worse. So these trackers and tracer apps, they actually park their stuff on whatever cheap resources they can find. These cheap resources are shared resources on AWS, Google, Azure, and other cloud platforms that they are using, that is being leveraged for attacks on innocent folks. But it gets even worse. These servers, these shared resources, are also used by legitimate companies. So the question now becomes, do you block the server, thereby blocking everyone else on the server, or do you let it go with a high likelihood that these compromised servers will actually compromise your infrastructure? We think differently, unfortunately, than the rest of the market. We basically say, if you have a vulnerable server, we flagged it as illegitimate or it's an attack source, we block it. I don't care if your name's Facebook. I don't care if your name is Lockheed Martin or whatever. If you park your stuff on a shared server and you don't take the time to vet this stuff and it's an attack source, you got to get blocked. People don't talk about this. I don't know why, but it's a big, big issue. When we talk about things, how can we change this? How can we be more honest? How can we actually add value? This is how we add value. So these things get breached. They continue to spy on users. They are leveraged to do malicious installs. They install spyware. There are CNC connections like Akamai and other places that are well known that also host patching services. So that's the next question then. If Akamai is being used by Apple and Microsoft to send out their patches, and it's also an attack source, we have to block the IP. If you block the IP, you may not be getting patches and updates from that service. It's a big issue, and it's something we have to start finally talking about. It's not just social media, it's this entire infrastructure. Okay, so that leads to data information, to IP theft, ransomware, infections, a whole bunch of things. And it's no longer something that's used for intel, it's also used for infection and delivery of various different things. But it can also, in starting 2022, one of the top 3 things that we're saying that are the biggest threats to humanity in the IT world is deepfakes. Now, imagine, if you will, not only getting malware, but some adversary that's so ticked off at you or peeved at you, they want to make you look bad. They'll manufacture an audio file or a video file. They'll plant it on your device. Maybe they'll target you. They'll write an email to, to the Washington Post or someone else. They planted information. You're not aware of this. Then suddenly the police knocks at your door. They confiscate your cell phone. And then they take a look at it. Oh, you've got pictures of stuff that's illegal. How do you prove it wasn't you? Big, big problem. Deepfakes. It's not just theoretical, it's practical. So how do these things get to our devices? Well, since the social media platforms are used for disinformation and things like that, they're also used for fake science. Now, what we did was we took a look at all these domains. There's about 1,000 of them that we're currently tracking that are specifically fake science. And we took a look at the IPs. And lo and behold, the servers are malware sources, they're bad reputation and attack originators, and they're bought by companies like LeaseWeb, 1&1, Sonos, AWS, Google, Azure, etc. So obviously the cloud platforms are not doing the job they're supposed to, and the people that own these resources are not vetting these IPs to make sure the reputations are good. Which leads us to a point: if you're going to be using cloud-based services, don't use shared resources. Buy your own dedicated stuff, or put your data center online with specific servers that are hardened and use that to do your stuff. Think about this 10 times before you actually go for cheap is good enough. So I'm going to highlight again what are some of the other issues of fake news, disinformation, and how that's used by nation states in this video right now.
When people think of cybersecurity, they think of computers, smartphones, tablets, IoT devices, and other electronic components. And then they think of the cyber attacks that can compromise or destroy the services and or these gadgets. But security is much more comprehensive. It includes many different aspects, such as physical security. With most people getting their news from websites or social media, the way that people have digested information and gotten the situation of any given moment in time has relied on many new channels of information. With these new channels of information, it has unfortunately now become easier more than ever to spread propaganda, false information, fake news, and other types of disruptive media to the masses. Unfortunately, this can be done to disrupt the political system, a nation, an interest group, or anything else in order to influence dissent, create disruptions for a certain political party or an interest group, or simply to change the dynamic of a country and get them prepared for an invasion. These types of systems and the way that they are used to disseminate propaganda are becoming more and more dangerous. And unfortunately, many new generations that are depending on these new types of social media and different types of electronic information do not understand a lot of the risks involved in what is propaganda and disruptions from different enemy nation states. Unfortunately, this avenue is a relatively cheap and low-risk form of warfare, which is comprised of hybrid warfare that uses non-traditional ways to wage warfare in the electronic age. This is why it is now the #1 tool used against political adversaries and other types of adversaries against an interest group or a nation state. It can be very easy and as basic as creating creative news or fake news stories online on numerous social media platforms and blogs. This piece of information, or these numerous social media platforms and blogs, are used to create a narrative that is not the truth. It can also be more complex, such as sending disruptors to hijack peaceful protests and also turn them into violent riots. Riots that can completely decouple a normal way of life in a given nation state. The examples of these are more than prevalent in the news today and in you, the reader or viewer's mind. We only need to take a look at some of the things about Black Lives Matter and these different types of platforms being misused by various different nation states to coordinate violent activities. The only way that you can detect that either you or your company or your country are targeted is to collect information using the information lifecycle or intelligence lifecycle to understand what it is that you're looking at, how these things are coordinated, and how to compare what fake is in relation to the truth. This is becoming much, much more difficult today than it was in the past. We have to filter out information that is propaganda, or at the very least is not telling us what is really happening, but is shaping a fake narrative and turning it into what people are starting to believe as reality. We have to find credible sources of data, information, and constantly fact-check them against everything that we read, see, hear, or view on the internet. Think of a world where you cannot trust any major news source or any type of online media in any way, shape, or form. Think about what that society is like, not trusting what you see, hear, or can view. We are very close to living in that world right now. What can we do about it? We need to take cybersecurity and defense seriously now before it's too late. And we also need to make sure that the entire world knows what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Okay, so I'll stop that right there so that we can keep on going. So we talked about people, processes, technology, training, and research. I'm going to get to some of the points and the issues that we have with social media now, and that's basically a few different things. Thing one that we're going to talk about is proxy warfare. Proxy warfare is not a new concept. It's been around since at least the 90s, probably the 80s, or even earlier than that. But for the cyber world, it's been around roughly since the 80s. So proxy warfare just means you have a nation state or an interest group. They use a proxy that they pay for the services. That proxy is the person that attacks you. And when you're trying to reverse engineer the attack back to who the originator was, guess what? You don't know. You get back to a specific IP or website or an IOC that points to one specific area, but it's not really the threat actor. And the reason for that is simple, because we have to do research and analysis and forensics analysis, and that's not something currently that machine learning can do, but I'll get to that in a second. So hybrid warfare is a term coined in 2015 by the Munich Security Report and Conference in 2015, and it just basically means that cyber forces were getting built up in a massive way to target social media and to deploy information warfare and propaganda to basically create local unrest and to support it. They also did this for economic warfare, for cyber attacks, and they created special cyber forces that were tasked to do this. So we've heard of these troll places, like for instance in St. Petersburg. There's also places in different APT groups throughout the world, in China and in other places. We actually have our own that does counterintelligence, just like every other country does. But that leads us to the next point: how do we resolve the issue? And what I'm going to say now is, I don't say because I want to criticize any company or anything, but I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, I'm a doctoral researcher that does research on these topics, and I can say beyond the shadow of a doubt that machine learning and AI only covers at the best 50% of the issue. 50% of reality of what we currently see in attacks, regardless of how dynamic they are. And the reason for that is simple. An algorithm or a mathematic principle needs to understand concepts that are already realized, already recognized, they're logical, they've been published, and they can be programmed into something. But the other half of that is qualitative. And qualitative is a very, very difficult type of research to do, because you don't have all these areas that can tell you exactly what's going on. Qualitative is very subjective, it's very dynamic, and it includes cultural, environmental awareness, societal factors, psychological factors of why people do things and how exactly they do it, and also the pros and cons that we as humans have in our own brains. So we don't have artificial intelligence. We do have machine learning, but machine learning has its limits. And the best way to see where these limits are is when we take a look at what the limitations are. So they encode a correlation of something that they know to look for, and there's indicators of this. If we don't have them, it can't look for it. It needs massive amounts of data to do that, but it doesn't show the cause and it doesn't show the relationship. Why is this important? We're seeing a lot of attacks that are very dynamic in nature leverage hybrid warfare. Hybrid warfare doesn't fit into machine learning or artificial intelligence. It's a qualitative a force and type of research that doesn't let itself be defined very easily because it's symbolic. It's based on symbolic reasoning, and it's not a very low level type of finite thing. It's very high level, and there's multiple different connections to multiple different layers of complexity. And that's something currently that machine learning was not built to do, nor can it do that in the near future or the midterm future. So it doesn't really secure the supply chain or the environment when we're going down to a specific dynamic level or to a higher level that requires symbolic understanding and reasoning. Human beings can do this with our brains because we're walking paradoxes, but an algorithm can't do that because they're not a paradox. Well, that's the way it is. So what do we need to do? Machine learning, a good example of how it doesn't work is social media. In social media, you click on something, even if it's not what you want to have, the machine learning algorithm says, oh, fantastic, you clicked on this. By the way, I have advertisers that pay me millions and billions of dollars for you to see exactly what they're advertising. So if you click on this video, I'm going to keep on sending you, you get this, you get this, you get this, you get this, forever, even though it's not what you want. But over time, this advertising starts to change the way your physiology in your brain is, the way your reasoning is. It basically gives you information about fake science, about websites that continuously get you engaged through emotional reasoning to shut off the logic part of your brain and to keep you engaged. So if we talk about workplace violence, if we talk about how threats and risks happen from external and internal factors, this is what we should be looking at. But it's a wicked topic. It's a topic that a lot of people don't want to look at, or maybe they don't have it on their radar. Unfortunately, it's on my radar, and I'm one of the first folks doing research on this because I want to connect the dots. I want to understand what's going on so I can help other people understand that too. In order to do that, we have to go through, we have to swim through all these swamps and look through all the dirty stuff that we don't want to do to get an understanding of what's really happening and how we can stop it. And we want to make better choices by creating that awareness. So machine learning also doesn't work well because it doesn't understand what I call multidimensional threat and risk theory. This basically means just like quantum technology or quantum science says the universe is connected to every material or type of material, risks and threats are exactly the same way as quantum mechanics. So risks and threats are interrelated to each other, to multiple dimensions, and to multiple layers of threats, risks at the same and other layers. And since this is the case, it completely blows the lid off of any machine learning and artificial intelligence because this is not logical. Things may or may not be related, and we would have to have a brain understanding of how to look at these things. And I mean not one person, but an entire army of folks to understand how threats and risks evolve and happen. So an example of this is we have the circles that are kind of things that we're aware of. We have port scans, we have DNS scans, although they're pretty difficult to detect, if not at all. We have social media scans, also pretty difficult. We have new connection requests on social media on LinkedIn. And then we have media and data searches through OSINT tools, so that adversaries in the darknet can start doing things like phishing attacks. They can test out servers for privilege escalation, plant criminal data or framing a victim, like I discussed before, creating false positives that are used for a lot of the open source intelligence block lists and feeds that you may have. And on and on and on. And these things are basically that multidimensional risks. Each one of these boxes is a separate threat, and it leads to bigger risks. But they're related to each other, and they're interrelated to other boxes. It doesn't always take a very clean path until it actually spreads propaganda. There's different avenues and different ways of doing things depending on how the attacker is thinking, what their methodology is, and what their end game is. And unless you understand the end game, you don't understand what they're really doing. So what do we do to simplify this? We use machine learning where it makes sense. So that means where we can use open source intelligence, we qualify and quantify that with our own closed intelligence, and we add value to it. So we try to get rid of all the BS and broomsticks, I say. We try to get it into, we try to get it into a fashion where it makes sense, and then we want to manage these resources and start blocking these things as easily and quickly as possible. So the second thing is we also want to implement this technology without any bells and whistles and architecture on our clients, our servers, different operating systems, and last but not least on any embedded device, IoT device, smartphone, so that we can use this intelligence to block stuff. And I'll stop for a second here. Phelan, did you want to say something?
I can champion people from the audience. Simon says that's shocking, I think, in relation to one of the statistics earlier. Terrell says, I can see how many physical security specialists will palm disinformation and cell phone security off to their IT departments, but we have to tackle this ourselves. I suppose we turn that into how?
Right. So the how basically is, one part of this is implementing technology that works. The second thing is integrating the research that we're doing into that technology to basically use machine learning where it makes sense. And then we need, the other part of research is those people that take a look at these evolving and emerging threats to understand what really the problem is, and then to start engaging the academic community, the agencies, so that we start to create laws and regulations that protect society like children that don't really know how to think about things, and just start to stop these things. Now, this is not a question of freedom of speech. And anytime someone says it's a question of freedom of speech, the BS alert alarm has to go off, because these are people that are using emotions, which is propaganda. So anytime someone uses emotional appeals to not do something, you need to ask yourself, is it based off of facts and research, or is this propaganda because it's an emotional appeal, right? That's the social engineering piece that uses those built-in errors that we have as humans. We want to trust other humans. And if someone is emotional, we want to help them. But that's exactly the stuff that's used in social engineering to stop these discussions that have to happen. Like Facebook is saying, there isn't an issue, or we'll change our company name. It doesn't resolve the issue though, right? So the other thing is, by implementing these solutions, it gives us a lot more time to concentrate on the stuff where we can't use machine learning. So when we build these systems up together, we have, for instance, the APIs to integrate with everything else that's out there, and we can use these things in a simple value for money way that brings results fairly quickly on the smartphones, on embedded devices, on IoT, on smart meters, all that kind of stuff. And we integrate with other technology out there, right? And then it's also, the people need training to understand what is the awareness they need. They need to understand that research has to be done on multiple levels. And we have to use this research by avoiding fake science, disinformation, and by getting back to a society that depends on facts as a basis for making its decisions. Right? I don't know, how much more time do we have?
Maybe a couple of minutes if you like.
Okay, so I'll leave this last video here, which highlights what is one of the end games that we've discussed a while back with a lot of different generals and brass in the European Union, but also stateside, on what some of the ultimate goals are of nation states deploying social media-based disinformation.